There's a common phrase that goes, "The devil's in the details," which, up until this list, meant that small mistakes in a larger scope are what makes or breaks something. But sometimes a game developer will mess up a very large detail and still publish a game. We don't really think there's a common phrase for that though, but there probably should be. Because the developers that made these mistakes really should have some kind of saying to properly describe the silly decisions they've made. So, without further ado, here are the 10 games that messed up the simple things. The really, really simple things.
We are duty-bound to uphold and fulfill Special Operation 217. Recommend we locate Anderson's wrist-mounted device before proceeding.
You might be thinking, Titanfall 2 is a good game, right? There's nothing particularly wrong with it. Well, you'd be right in thinking that. However, EA still messed up. Big surprise, we know. But they messed up in two ways regarding Titanfall. One was launching it between the release of Battlefield 1 and Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, which was always going to be a losing battle. And secondly, and most importantly, EA basically did no marketing for Titanfall 2, which is odd considering how good the game actually is and how well received it was. For some reason, EA had a distinct lack of faith in the game, which translated into underwhelming sales and player numbers. But we're going to go ahead and blame EA on this one, seeing as marketing is 50% of the game, and they kind of dropped the ball on that one. No point in making a great game if no one knows about it. Where to begin, eh? There's so many aspects to this game we could happily tear to shreds, but perhaps it's best to start by asking why, in the name of the mighty Thor, Bungie opted to take everything they learned from the 3 years of running Destiny 1 and cast it aside to start back at square one with Destiny 2. Just why, Bungie? There's seemingly no rhyme or reason to their madness in this regard either. The original entry into the franchise was also quite a dumpster fire on launch, but over the course of 3 years, it progressed into something quite enjoyable, with lots of replay value. Then, Destiny 2 happened, and everyone thought the game would continue building upon the concept. Instead, players were brought right back to where they were in Destiny 1 with even more frustrating elements.
Okay, the shield generator should be at the bottom of the ship.
We've quite often praised the Halo franchise in some previous lists of ours. This is generally because we're talking about the good entries in the franchise like Halo 2 or Halo 3. On this rare occasion, we're going to talk about Halo 4, the game that killed the franchise a little bit. 343 Industries took over from Bungie, and they opted to make Halo 4 more accessible to the masses, which meant attempting to make it a Call of Duty clone, which, as you'd expect, failed miserably. Fans of the franchise were left frustrated by the terribly small skill gap in ranked playlists, and newcomers didn't stick around long because it was a bit pointless to play a Call of Duty clone when Call of Duty could just be played instead. Do we really have to explain where EA went wrong with this one? It rhymes with moot ox or flute rocks. Yes, we're of course going to talk about the loot box controversy surrounding Star Wars Battlefront 2. It wasn't so much a controversy as it was a full-on Reddit riot. The hate and vitriol got so intense that Disney had to step in and slap EA on the wrists, like a disappointed father scolding his son for stealing money from the neighbor kids, which is somewhat the same kind of thing as EA were doing. Happily liberating the unsuspecting youths playing Star Wars from their parents' hard-earned cash. Of course, aside from that, the multiplayer was poorly realized, the story was bland and derivative, serving as a greatest hits montage of Star Wars rather than a coherent narrative. And EA may have suffered the wrath of Disney with this one, as rumors are that other developers will be given the IP instead. There's not much we can criticize GTA 5 on, but we certainly can have a little bit of a go at GTA Online. Not so much what it is now, because there may be microtransactions, but they're not really forced in any way. We emphasize the word micro in that because the most expensive shark card costs $75, which is just dumb. Anyway, to get back to this list, It's the launch of GTA Online that could have perhaps been handled better. The game sold 11 million copies in the first day of release, and Rockstar opted to keep the online servers down for the first 2 weeks. This didn't help at all because once they opened the proverbial gates, Rockstar servers completely collapsed. It took months for GTA Online to reach any kind of playable state. If there was a game that taught us to never pre-order ever again, it was No Man's Sky. The difference between what was hyped and what was delivered was absurd to the point where it was almost funny. Almost, for those who bought it at least. It was probably quite funny for the folks that didn't buy into the hype and waited for reviews. Perhaps Hello Games could have taken a little bit more care with how they advertised the reality of their game. Or perhaps they could have made an attempt at delivering a genuinely good and playable game too. Who are we to say, really? We're just some gamers who may or may not have been scorned by the false advertising of No Man's Sky. Totally not salty about it either. Sequelitis is a term generally reserved for films, when a sequel fails to expand on the previous film in any significant way and just kind of sucks. Well, this applies to games as well. However, Assassin's Creed 2 definitely expanded on the format of the original game and did it really well. However, 7 installments after said sequel, we have Assassin's Creed Syndicate, a game that definitely suffers from sequelitis. The game basically follows the same formula of here's a historically significant city in a major period of its history. It also happens to be controlled by Templars. You must liberate it from the Templars one section at a time. Is this Ubisoft messing up something simple? Maybe. They tried doing something fresh and new in Assassin's Creed 4, but then reverted to type for the next few games. There are loads of important aspects to game development, more than we could probably count to be honest, but there's one that probably lists quite highly in this realm, and that's making sure your game runs properly. DICE, however, seemed to be reading from a different list when they released Battlefield 4 into the world. It was riddled with bugs, the servers could barely handle the traffic, and the game itself suffered from countless glitches as well, to the point that players simply could not properly play for weeks after launch. You'd think that this would be a pretty damn important thing to get right, but hey, if they did get it right, then we'd have a list of 9 games here instead of a list of 10. So count yourselves lucky that DICE done goofed so hard with Battlefield 4. Much like Destiny 1, The Division suffered from having very little to do when the game launched, which has been fixed since by lots of DLC and patches. However, that doesn't stop us from including the game in our list because what's the point in making this massively expansive game and then failing to fill it with anything meaningful for the player to do? Perhaps we're being too harsh. There was a fair amount to do as you leveled up your player, but once that was achieved, there was indeed very little to actually do in the endgame. Aside from killing the same massively bullet spongy boss a few times over, until he got bored and decided to go kill the bullet sponge bosses of Destiny instead. When people have to almost literally play to complete the final mission, then you've definitely messed up. And Middle-earth, Shadow of War falls into the category of completely messing it all up. We'd use another word instead of messing, but we don't want to get demonetized. You get the idea though. Yes, it is technically possible to somewhat finish the game without purchasing the loot boxes provided by the game, but it's unbelievably difficult to do so, to the point that the game basically forces the blight of the loot boxes upon the player. Which is a shame because the game is actually so cool, but just ruined by such a blatant and lazy cash grab. And those are the games that messed up the simple things. The list could probably go on for a while, but we decided to randomly stop at 10. Totally random choice, really. Which other games messed up the simple things? Let us know in the comments, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this here at Zoomin Games.
Threat neutralized. Well done. This victory has raised our combat rating.